Hello, amazing parents and caretakers, and welcome to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. I'm your family empowerment coach, Celia Kibler. I'm a mom of a blended family of 5 kids. I'm a grandma of 9 kids, an author, a teacher, a speaker, and a consultant with over 40 years of training and real-life parenting experience. I'm here to offer you practical, doable tips, strategies, and techniques that will pump up your parenting skills and create peace, love, and laughter throughout your family. In addition, I'll be interviewing some great humans that are on a mission to make your life a better, happier, and healthier life. So let's not waste any time and get started with the next episode of the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. Thanks for listening. Just a really amazing, wonderful human, and bringing calm, peace, teachings, Indigenous teachings to the world. And so let me introduce you to Bob Vetter. Robert Vetter, M.A., is a cultural anthropologist, healer, and storyteller with over 3 decades of direct experience studying with Indigenous elders and traditional healers. His work centers on one timeless truth: healing is more than symptom relief. It's the return to purpose, connection, and soul. Blending deep scholarship with lived experience, Robert brings forward the wisdom of sacred traditions in a way that is grounded, accessible, and transformative. As the host of the Healing and Spirituality in World Cultures podcast and the creator of Soul Medicine, Journey from Calling to Practice, he guides audiences to remember who they are, why they're here, and how to live in alignment with the deeper truths of healing. Whether on stage or behind the mic, Robert doesn't just speak, he transmits a feeling of belonging, reverence, and renewal. In his workshop, Healing Rage and Anger, One Encounter at a Time, we're going to find peace in our individual lives, in our society, and for our children. Anger may seem to be the culprit standing in the way, but what if we can befriend our anger and allow it to be a productive outlet instead of it leading to violence and suffering? In this presentation, we explore ways to understand anger and uncover pathways to peace and calm. We're going to run a little video, and then we will welcome Bob to the summit. The video stopped.
Welcome to the International Day of Calm Summit.
Welcome, Bob.
Good morning, Celia. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I am very good. No whiteboard behind you?
No whiteboard. It's just me talking today.
Okay, well, that's good because you have a lot to tell us and teach us. So I'm going to let you take it away, and thank you for being here.
Wonderful. It's my pleasure. So I want to start with a question that I often ask children because, as Celia knows, I do a lot of work with kids. And one of the questions that I like to ask is this: can you think back to a time when you were really, really angry at somebody? And the question is this: in that moment, did you think about the consequences of your actions, or did you just want to do something right there in that moment? And the answer for most of us is we have an impulse to just do something right now without thinking about the consequences. And it's that mechanism that I want to examine with you today. And I'll begin with a story because everything begins with a story with me. But at any rate, I just came back recently from France, where Maddie and I were there. We're delivering a workshop for 1 week on wisdom and healing. And after the course was over for a week, I had 2 days that I did of healings back to back. And the last healing on the second day was really surprising. So I had this woman, I'm just going to call her Renee, who she talked about self-sabotage. She talked about problems with communication, problems in her friendship, problems in her work. And she worked at sometimes with children. And because of an encounter that she had at work, they banned her for 10 years from working with children. And so over the course of the time that we spent together, I asked her to kind of unpack that with me and talk about what had happened. And it was a really, really interesting experience for me. I have to say that I've never done a healing session quite like this before, because what she explained to me was, well, the first part that she explained is not that unusual. She kind of blamed everybody else for what happened. But what she went on to explain was when people would speak to her in a certain way, that it was as though she had no choice. She reacted immediately to what happened. And so I realized in that moment that I was going to have to treat her like a child, because nobody had taught her a different way to react. Nobody had taught her that she had any alternatives. And when I explained to her that in that moment that she had that impulse, that she had a choice in how to act, she looked totally flabbergasted, like nobody had ever told her that before, that in that moment that you have a choice. So in fact, what she said was, it's who I am and it's the way I speak. And that's the problem. When we come up with a concept of ourselves that says, this is a part of my being, it's simply who I am. It suggests that I don't have any options. I don't have any choices. But we do. We have a choice in that moment. And that was what I guided her through, step by step, part of a process that I'll talk to you over the course of this session about. So I want to start with a couple of definitions. And these are not the only definitions, but they're definitions that I pulled off the internet. So let's see how they go. First, let's talk about what is anger. Anger is an intense emotional state involving a strong, uncomfortable, and non-cooperative response to a perceived provocation, hurt, or threat. So anger is that reaction that we have to a situation that we don't like. It's how we respond emotionally. So anger, as was described during my intro, is not necessarily the problem. Anger is a way that we maintain borders so that we keep ourselves safe. Now, the problem is when anger gets transformed into something more extreme. And we're going to look at rage and we're going to look at aggression. So rage, again, giving you a definition, rage is a powerful and intense and often uncontrollable form of anger, characterized by a strong feeling of fury or violent emotion. So now we've gone from mere anger, which is an internal feeling that I have, to externalizing it in rage, where it becomes extreme. And then aggression is even a step further. Aggression is a hostile or violent behavior or attitude toward another. Now, here's where we get the problem, because now we've taken something that started with a thought, started with an internalized emotion, and we externalize it. We act on it in a way that may be harmful to another human being. Now, I like to talk about the story of the peacemaker, who was an important figure in Haudenosaunee or Iroquois history. They were a number of Native people, are a number of Native people. Originally, there were 5 that made up a confederacy called the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy. Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, later joined by the Tuscarora. So today they make a total of 6 nations. But the story that I'm just going to draw a little piece from goes back in their history. They say somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago in their oral tradition. And they talk about this figure called the peacemaker. And the peacemaker was sent to this world to put the people back on the right track because they had violated their original instructions. And their original instructions were, number 1, to always be thankful. Number 2, to always treat others with kindness and respect. And number 3, live within a family structure called the clan system that maintains loving relationships within the family. And as long as they had followed those instructions, they were able to live in a good way. But once they violated them, all of a sudden, what controlled their actions were anger, rage, aggression. And it became what they called their dark and troubled times, times of intense warfare, times of intense revenge, blood revenge, an awful, awful time to be alive. So the peacemaker was sent to this world, they say, to put the people back on the right track, to return to them the 3 original instructions. Now, that story, what I just told you is like a tiny, tiny piece of what they say is a 10-day story to tell the entire thing. But it's a brilliant mechanism to understand our minds, our emotions, and our actions. Now, there's a subplot in the story about a man named Hiawatha or Hiawatha. And Hiawatha had his own trajectory in the story because he had been teaching teachings of peace within his community. But there was an evil sorcerer who was the leader of that group. His name was Tadadaho. And Tadadaho got his power from hateful means, from violence. So he didn't want there to be this guy teaching teachings of peace. So Tadadaho mysteriously murdered Hiawatha's 7 daughters and his wife, one at a time. And at the time, there was this belief that if a series of bad things happened to somebody, everybody would leave that person alone. They would stay away from them because they would be afraid that the bad luck would get to them. So this was a way of him making sure that nobody in their community would have anything to do with Hiawatha. But Hiawatha was near death. He had lost his will to live after losing all 7 of his daughters and his wife. And it was the peacemaker who condoled him in a ceremony that's called the condolence ceremony, and eventually restored his will to live. And in the process, he had to deal with his grief. And he had to not only deal with his grief, but he had to forgive Tadadaho. And that was the amazing part of the story. He had this anger. He had this idea even of revenge, and he had to eliminate that. He had to give that up in order to forgive what had been done to him. Now, a lot of the teachings that I learned, I received from an elder named Tom Porter, who is just an amazing figure. And I had him on my podcast one day, and we were talking about the condolence ceremony. And I asked him to explain it. And the first thing that he said in talking about this ceremony, he said, everything in this world wants to be appreciated. And at the time I was listening, I thought, well, that's kind of a strange way to start talking about condolence, to soothe the feelings of somebody who's in pain. But then the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. everything wants to be appreciated. Now, he extended it to everything in the world, to animals, to plants, to inanimate objects. But for today, we're just going to be talking about the human world. So let's just say that everybody wants to be appreciated. Well, what is anger? Anger is when somebody else does not feel appreciated. Anger is that emotion that maintains these boundaries and says, I am not being appreciated in this situation. So that's the mechanism that we're going to be looking at. Now, in the story of the Haudenosaunee, one of the most fascinating things that I think I've ever heard is what they had. It was an ancient practice that when a group of people from another tribe or nation wanted to visit them, they wouldn't let them directly into their village. Instead, they would meet that delegation at a neutral place, and they would sit with those people and they would ask them, what deaths and other losses have you endured over the course of the last 12 months? And they would sit with those people in their pain and in their loss before they would bring them into their village. Why? Because these unprocessed feelings of grief usually lead in one or two different directions, but both of them are destructive. If we take that feeling of unresolved grief and we extend it out into the world, it goes out in aggression and violence, as in the story that I just told you before. And the second way is equally destructive. If we turn it inside, it becomes a mechanism of self-sabotage, self-destruction, and even suicide. And that is a brilliant way to look at it. So they wouldn't bring these people into their village until they had condoled their losses, because otherwise there was the threat of aggression and violence in bringing these people in. So I want to talk next about what happens in that moment. I started this out by saying, what happens in that moment when we feel anger? Do we think about the consequences, or do we act immediately? Now, one of the things that the peacemaker said was that there isn't evil in the world. Instead, we bring it on through our mind, because there are two ways of using our mind, and he called them the good mind and the quick mind. So the quick mind is quick to become angry, quick to take action, and slow to forgive others. But the peacemaker was in favor of something called the good mind. And the good mind is slow to become angry, slow to take action, and quick to forgive others. So the question is, how do we do that? That's the complicated part of this. How do we shift from the quick mind to the good mind? And the answer is, we take a pause. We take a moment to consider what we're about to do and what our actions might be and what the consequences of those actions might be. Now, in NLP, which a lot of you probably know about, neuro-linguistic programming, there's something called a pattern interrupt. And a pattern interrupt is a specific technique that's used to change the state that a person is in. So a pattern interrupt can take place spontaneously. It could take place where I'm working one-on-one with somebody and I do something to interrupt their state. And a pattern interrupt can be something that I do on myself to change my state in that moment. And I want to consider these. Now, the first way that I want to talk about is a spontaneous way that there may be a change in pattern. And Celia, I didn't even tell you this, but here's where I get to put you on the spot today.
Oh, no.
Because
should I come on screen? I'll come on screen with you. You can put me on the spot.
Yeah, you know what? Well,
won't be the first
let
one.
me tell one other story first. Let me tell
about
a spontaneous one, and then I'm going to talk about one that you did. Okay.
Oh, good.
So, okay.
And
So the
how
first,
embarrassing will that be?
it's great.
Okay.
You'll love it. Okay. So the first story that I'm going to tell is about a spontaneous pattern interrupt. Now, I have a friend, I'm not going to mention his name, but he is Cherokee, and he used to, years ago, he used to like to go on the powwow circuit. And for those of you who are not familiar with powwows, these are intertribal dances of Native Americans who, now the dances fall into a series of categories. And within each category, you can compete for prizes. Sometimes it's not a prize at all. Sometimes it's a cash prize. Sometimes it's something that you're given, but there are prizes within each of these categories of the dancers, and then in the singers or drummers as well. So my friend liked to go, and he would go from powwow to powwow on the weekends whenever he had off. And there used to be a lot more than there are now. Where I live here on Long Island now, there are two every year, but they used to be all over the place. So in the powwow, you'll wear an outfit that goes with that category of dance, and then you'll wear a number so that the judges know which dancer is which, so that they can assign these first, second, third place in each of them. Now, the rule dictating that is that in order to be admitted into it, you have to be present at what's called grand entry. And grand entry is the first dance of the day, when all of the categories of dancers get up and dance at the same time. And they kind of parade into the dance arena. And that one is not competitive, but it allows you to enter into the competition. So my friend would go from powwow to powwow. And I'll start this by saying he's a very impatient person. And he's not very good at the mechanism that I described to you a moment ago. And he drives fast. All of that is going to play a part in the story that I'm going to tell you next. So he leaves his house and he's late in leaving. So in order to make up the time, because he's got to be there for grand entry, he's driving like a lunatic down the road. So he's driving fast, and all of a sudden, he's almost where he's going. He's got a little ways to go. This guy pulls out in a pickup truck with a trailer, and the guy's going like 5 miles an hour. And my friend is like flipping out. He's going nuts. There's like smoke coming out of his ears. He's wearing his dance outfit in the car. So he is angry. He's beeping. He's yelling. He's screaming. The guy pulls over with the truck, the pickup, and the trailer. And he gets out of his truck. And the two of them are now squaring off in the middle of the street with people watching all over. The guy getting out of the pickup truck apparently was on his way to a rodeo, and he had a horse in the back of the trailer. So he's dressed like a cowboy. My friend is dressed like an Indian. They're looking at each other. They're about to square off and fight, but they see how ridiculous this whole thing is, and they both start to laugh. And then they get back in their cars and they leave. And I love that story because that is like such an amazing pattern interrupt that just spontaneously happened. So it may happen like that on its own. And you'll notice that humor was the mechanism in that story. Now I want to give you an example of a brilliant person who used humor for a pattern interrupt. Celia, can you tell your sock story?
My sock story.
About your father's rage?
What sock story is that?
Your father was running around the house screaming like a lunatic, and you were hiding behind the wall at the doorway. You got to remember this story.
I don't remember.
You don't remember the story? Oh my God. I should have reminded you.
Okay, you have to tell it because I don't remember it.
So Maddie and Celia's father, we love him. We love the memory of him. And I didn't know him in his early years, but apparently
But when you met him, that was really special
Yeah,
too.
well, that
But
was another
that's
story.
another story.
That's another story for another time. But I mean, when I knew him, he was a pretty mellow guy for the most part. But apparently, when he was much younger, and when the kids were young, he would fly into rages all the time. Am I right, Celia?
Yes. That's why
So,
we're dedicating this to him.
and apparently, there was one day that he was in a rage and he was yelling and screaming around the house. And there were two adjacent rooms. And Celia hid. Do you know the rest? Do you know the story I'm going to
Where I
tell?
did my dance.
Yeah. So tell that part of the story.
So I did like a so he's running around screaming and yelling and he always thought that we got along, him and I got along best. There are four of us, three girls, one boy. And he always thought we got along best, but we got along best because when he would yell, I would leave. Everybody else would yell back, but I would leave. So he's yelling around and then so you know the song Let Me Entertain You? Let me entertain you. So so he's running around the house yelling, and I open a door and my foot and sock is just like coming out of the door and doing the let me entertain you dance, foot and sock, and kind of broke the tension.
Well, the story that that Maddie told was that you kept throwing like socks out,
Oh yeah, I
and
forgot
you
about that part.
continued to do that. And your father started out being like incredibly angry and enraged, and finally he just threw his arms up in the air and walked away.
Perfect.
It is perfect. It was brilliant. It was brilliant because it was using humor to diffuse that situation. So that's the second example that I wanted to use of how to use this interrupt pattern. So the first
It's a
was,
good story. I forgot about it.
well,
Now
I
I'm
think you
leaving
should
you.
use it all the time.
I should. I forgot
So
all about it.
so in the first example, it was spontaneous. In the second example, it was something that was initiated by Celia. So the point is that any one of us can diffuse a situation by a pattern interrupt, by doing something in the moment, generally unexpected, that changes the other person's state to diffuse the anger and the rage. In the third example, I'm going to talk about what I can do for myself in that moment to diffuse my own anger and my own rage. So if we go back to the example that I started with, I asked you to consider, well, when you feel that sense of anger, do you think about the consequences of your actions? Do you take that pause, or do you immediately move into action, sometimes action that you might come to regret later? And one of the things that we can do is to take a pause. And how do we take a pause? Well, a person who is perpetually angry and enraged probably does not have a strong sense of what it is to experience calm in order to bring about that pause. So I like to say that we can do something that we call anchoring. We can anchor a feeling of calm and call it pause or call it calm. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 minutes right now to induce that feeling. And what we'll do is we'll do 15-second inhalation, 16-second exhalation, check in with that feeling, and we're going to call it pause. Okay, so if you want to do this with me, let's try it together. So first, begin by just totally exhaling so that your lungs are empty. Now, 15 seconds of inhalation, just very, very slowly inhale. And now from the belly, exhaling. That's one cycle. Now let's inhale. And now let's exhale. And that's 2 cycles. We have 2 more to go. So let's slowly inhale. And now exhale. That's 3 cycles. Now 1 more cycle to go. We'll inhale. And exhale. And if you feel a difference in your state right now, from that sense of calm, let's anchor the word pause. With that sense of calm, let's say the word pause. And one more time. From that state, say the word out loud, even pause. So that that word now gets linked up with that state. So that in that moment, when anger arises, I can go around that immediate impulse to act by returning to the state that I have right now of pause. Now, I want to connect that in kind of wrapping this up. I want to connect it with a show that I just watched, and maybe some of you listening or watching right now might have seen a show called Adolescence, and it was pretty widely watched. It was a pretty popular series, and in the show, I mean, I'm going to have to do a little bit of a spoiler alert here, but please watch it. It is painful at times, but the point that it makes is brilliant. There is a 13-year-old boy who is accused of murder at the beginning of the show. And over the course of the episodes, we find out about the father. The show actually focuses a lot upon the father. And the father was raised in an abusive household where he was beaten by his father. And he was determined not to make the same mistake with his 2 children. So he never beat them. Nonetheless, they were around his rages and his tantrums of violence that didn't go to them, but he would destroy things. He would kind of go nuts. And the point of the show is, or at least one of the points, is the impact that internal violence that was externalized, even though it wasn't externalized into violence against the boy, nonetheless had its impact on him. So the point that I want to leave you with today is, as adults, that we are constantly role models for the children who are around us. And if we want to live in a world of peace and calm, each one of us is responsible for our own behaviors. The things around us may influence our thoughts and our emotions, but we are responsible for the actions that we take based on them. And in that moment of experiencing anger, we can choose how to act, and in that way, make a difference in the world around us. So with that, Celia, I will open it up to you and questions that you and or our viewers might have.
Thank you so much. That was so great, and emphasizes, what I teach as well. I teach parents to think of the acronym, and I've said it I guess yesterday, maybe the day before, PEPA, which is not the pig, because you take an extra P and you throw that away because that's for the pig. But it's pause, evaluate, plan, and act. So you're actually pausing. And if you think of the word Peppa, like for you, you think of the word pause, you pause. You relate it to that breath. And then evaluate what's going on. Take your time to look at what's going on. Plan a productive, constructive response, and then do that, basically. So very similar. Pausing is so important because that gives you the ability to see things clearly. We have a couple questions. One is from Ernalee. Do you want to ask your question?
Sure, I can
But you
do
guys
that.
can ask them live or I can read them.
Okay, so my question was for the third negative quality. There was self-sabotage, self-sacrifice. What was the third one?
What did I say? Oh my goodness, it must have been brilliant.
Test. It's a test.
So it was unprocessed feelings of grief come out
Oh
as.
yeah, no, I said that there were two ways that unprocessed grief is expressed.
Right.
One is externally in violence against another person, whether it's violence of actions or words, either one. They are both violence, by the way, and that's the point. And secondly is if I internalize it and I use it as self-sabotage, or even in the extreme case, suicide. And by the way, that's also why we see addiction as well.
Right.
Unprocessed.
I actually had an extra question, if I may ask.
Sure.
This. Yeah.
Question
That
away.
is, I work with kids and with families, but kids who have ADHD. So for somebody who has compromised impulse control already, what would you suggest?
Yeah. So what I suggest is role playing.
Right. Good
Yeah,
idea.
I mean role playing, because you can be the example, and you can talk about something that you went through and what your impulse was, what you felt like doing in that moment, what you did instead, and then even act it out, even have the children enact an example of something that might cause you anger, and then have them in that moment. What happens when I take a moment? What happens when I pause? Because children, they love to play act at things. So you could create scenarios for them to try out in their experience. And so, one example might be where you don't act it out, where you just give them a scenario. You're on the playground and somebody does something mean to you. How do you feel? So one thing to do is to articulate the emotions, where rather than bottling them up, they get used to figuring out, well, what is my emotion? How am I feeling in the moment? What is it that I feel like doing? And if I do it, what's going to happen? So for example, I don't like how somebody treats me on the playground. Well, what are my choices? Well, if I go with the quick mind, I smack the other kid. Now, well, what's going to happen as a result of that? Well, even if I'm not concerned about what happens to that other child in the pain that it causes, what's going to happen to me? Maybe I'm going to go to the principal's office. Maybe I'm going to get sent home. Maybe I have to answer to my parents. So those are the consequences of my actions. What can I do instead? What can I do in that moment? One thing that I can do is I can respond by telling that other child what's going on with me, that really, that hurt me, and obviously there are kids who are not going to respond to that kind of vulnerability, but some will. Another example is I can walk away. When I walk away, what happens? So there are countless examples of that in the adult world as well. I have a friend who was telling me a story recently about, he was driving in the car and he pulls over. It was road rage. This guy is out of the car. They're yelling, they're screaming, and he got back in his car and he drove away. And he was telling my friend in kind of a macho way about how he felt like he was a coward, and he didn't fight this guy and he could have fought the guy. And my friend talked him down by saying, okay, well, let's say you were the tough guy. Let's say you beat that guy up right there. There's probably people around who have their phones and they're going to record it. What happens if you get arrested? What happens if you go to jail? It happened on a Friday. You're going to be in jail all weekend. And then your wife is going to have to go and bail you out. Then you're going to have to pay for a lawyer. And then you're going to have to hope that that lawyer can beat this instead of you going to jail. So he was talking him through all of these consequences for the guy to understand it. And in the same way, I think we can do that with a child to understand consequences that they don't necessarily consider in that moment of anger turning into rage, turning into aggression.
Yes, those are just powerful examples. Thank you so much. I think as far as road rage went, I'm a pretty calm driver. But I remember years ago, I was younger, and of course, years ago I would be younger. I I was driving, and this guy was so angry behind me, and he pulled out to go beyond me, and he pulled beside me, and I was going to be pulling out. I wasn't driving. I guess I was just pulling out, and he pulled kind of beside me, and he rolled down his window automatically, and he was yelling and screaming and just losing it at me, right? For really no reason. There was no reason to have done it. And in the moment, it was so interesting because this little bit of joy bubbled up inside of me. And I just looked at him and I went, "Hi!" And I blew him kisses, right? And the look
Pattern
on this
interrupt.
guy's, yeah, interrupt, right? Pattern interrupt. And he was just like, he didn't know what to do. He could barely drive away. Finally, he drove away. And I was like, oh, yeah, that feels so good. I felt great, right?
Wonderful. That's a perfect example of another pattern interrupt. I
Oh,
love it.
thank you so much for your wisdom. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, Celia, should I look on in the chat? It looks like,
I think Czar's been pretty good about bringing up questions. We have one
yeah,
more question from Michelle, and I
yeah.
don't know if Michelle is where we can't see. Is that in? Yeah, Michelle.
Well, I'll read it from the chat. I have it
Okay.
pulled up. My husband has unhealed trauma and refuses to seek help due to his pride. How can I get him to seek help? We have 3 children. Honestly, what immediately came to my mind when I saw that is for you to ask him to watch that show, Adolescence, with you. Because I think that in that show, like in watching it after the last episode, and really the point of it is driven home in that final painful to watch episode. And maybe by seeing it enacted in that show and what happened, it might help him to connect his unresolved trauma, his internal rage, with the possibility of the effect that it might have on his children. So maybe even if he doesn't want to do it for his own sake, if he sees it there on the screen and the direct connection that the character in the show, the father, that his internalized rage had on his son, maybe your husband will understand the responsibility that he has to his children. And at least that would introduce how you could have this conversation. That's my thought.
And it's good advice. That is a very impactful show. It's a mini series, guys. It's not a movie. It's a mini series, and it's on. What's it on? Netflix?
I think it was Netflix. It was either Netflix or Prime, but I think it's Netflix.
Yeah, I think it's Netflix
Easy
too.
enough to find.
Yeah,
And it's not a fun show. Just
no,
so you know, it's not like, oh, what a feel good show. It's not.
no, there's
But it's
not.
brilliant in pointing out everything that we've been talking about here today.
I agree. I totally
I
agree.
watch it, Bob. I watch it. it was really hard to watch that, especially for a mom like me, has a boy, I have boys, and my eldest is almost 10. And, I feel so emotional right now because when I watched the first episode, I cried so hard.
Mm.
Like, I'm so scared for my kids to experience that. And yes, I highly recommend that you watch that. It was, very awakening, especially for parents, that don't be so confident that your kids are safe and you would ask them and then they would say, yeah, school is good, but in reality, it's not. So better check on your kids every day, talk to them, ask their feelings. How is it going? It's very helpful and it's a must watch.
And be intentional with your behaviors
Yeah.
and
Right.
heal thyself.
I'm so glad that you added that, Sar. That's
Yeah, because uh, I just saw that on TikTok and I got curious. And then when I watched that, it was really heavy. Like the moment that the father, there was a scene, they were interviewing by the policeman. And then that scene really is heartbreaking. Because when the father was in denial at first, of course, it's his child. But when they saw the CCTV footage and there they saw it happened, the father was, his heart was really crashed. And as a parent, it was really painful to watch. So you better see that on Netflix, I think.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is what it's on.
Conan
Thank
had
you.
oh, you're welcome, Sar. Conan had a kind of a long question here. Um, Essentially, what she's asking is, um, while I addressed the part of the equation that has to do with personal anger and what I might do about anger for myself and set a good example for children, there's another part of this, and it is what happens when you are exposed to that. And the answer is that it is a trauma response. And that could be the topic of an entire other presentation. So I kind of apologize for not being able to address that. What I will say is that a lot of healing practices look at trauma and how we deal with the fallout of it. And, there's practically nobody who is without trauma in their life, a trauma response to something that happened to us. In the particular healing systems that I work with, we talk about something called susto, which is soul fright. And when something traumatic happens to us, there's a part of our soul that we believe leaves and goes to the place where the trauma occurred. And in our healing practices, we do what we can ceremonially to invite those parts to come back. That's one way. I mean, there are lots of psychological ways of dealing with trauma that are beyond the scope of this morning's presentation, but maybe in the future, I or somebody else could address trauma and what it has to do with anger and rage in a future calm day summit. So might be a suggestion for next time, Celia.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to do a couple more of these throughout the year that are not like 3-day long summits, more kind of focused. Ernalee, you have another question?
I was just wondering, Bob, if you could speak to what I know as what's called the parts model, you know? So when a child doesn't understand what's going on and how to deal with something, they react in a big way. They're angry, they melt down, whatever. And then when they calm down, that part kind of gets pushed to the back. But when
Yeah.
they become adults, when they get into a situation where things will flip them, that part will come up again. So it's really hard to talk to somebody and deal with somebody who is now behaving from their 3-year-old or 5-year-old self, and then have that part go away again and they're going, I don't know what you're talking about. I used to have an ex-husband that did this, right?
Yeah.
So if you could just speak to that and how
Yeah, I mean,
how
that
you would handle it.
right. I know about parts therapy. It's
Mhm.
not my area of expertise, but yeah, I mean, the whole idea is that I am, in a way, a different person in different situations. And, that's what parts therapy is based on is a model of family relationships that I think it was Richard Schwartz came up with this idea. He was a family counselor, and he said that in a family you have family dynamics because you have all these different personalities who are interacting with one another. And what he said was each one of us is like that because we have all of these different personalities. Another way to describe those is I am not just one identity, I'm many relational selves. So yeah, so what I want to be able to do is to switch from one to another, to acknowledge when I'm becoming that child, and then know who I would prefer to be, how I can switch from that one to the other.
Right. Thank you.
Bob, thank you so much again for your wisdom and a wonderfully impactful discussion and training. I really appreciate it. And I think everybody here that listened appreciated it.
May I
If
offer
somebody
freebies?
wants to,
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yeah, you're a
someone
step
wants
ahead
to
of me.
reach out to you, how do they do it?
Yes. So my website is www.bobvetter.com. And we're putting together a healing community. So maybe some of you can bring some of your concerns to that future online free healing community. Those of you who have an interest in healing practices, there are all kinds of freebies on my website. So there either is now or there will soon be a questionnaire that you could take to decide whether you should be a healer. I have a game called Sustos, which asks you to look at your past experiences in a board game. That's kind of fun. That was another whole big story. And there's this healing community. There's a whole bunch of podcasts about topics like what we talked about today. So go there for lots of free stuff.
Thank you, Bob, so much. Thank you for listening to the Pumped Up Parenting Podcast. If this episode was helpful to you, please share it with a friend and leave us a review that will help others. Wonder why kids don't come with a manual? Well, wonder no more, because I wrote you one, and it's just won a wonderful Mom's Choice Award. Go to celiasbooks.com and buy your copy of Raising Happy Toddlers, as well as my children's books. I appreciate you being part of my mission to help 10 million parents stop yelling at their kids. Please be intentional and hug on those kids of yours. See you at the next episode.